We are living in a blizzard of trauma. Every day, a frictionless feed of conflict, disaster, and desperation is beamed directly through our screens. Modern society possesses immediate access to the visceral reality of global atrocities. We can witness a famine on one continent and a war on another, all before breakfast. By conventional logic, this constant exposure to human suffering should produce a deeply empathetic and politically active population. To see the pain of others is supposed to compel us to stop it. Yet the opposite has occurred. Our hyperexposure has not generated a mass mobilization of empathy. Instead, it has bred a profound moral apathy and a pervasive sense of political paralysis. In 1977, the cultural critic Susan Sontag published On Photography, a collection of essays that diagnosed this exact paralysis long before the internet accelerated it. Sontag was an American writer and philosopher who spent decades analyzing how media shapes moral frameworks. Her central thesis was blunt. A camera is not a neutral, passive machine merely recording reality. The act of photographing imposes a completely new grammar and ethics of seeing onto the world. To understand our modern moral numbness, we have to dissect the predatory mechanics of photography itself. We need to uncover how images replace rigorous political understanding with easily consumable aesthetics. Sontag argues that to photograph something is to appropriate it. It means putting oneself into a certain relation to the world that feels like knowledge, and therefore feels like power. When a person steps behind this mechanical eye, they cease to be an active participant in the event. The camera provides a physical barrier, allowing the user to claim a piece of reality without engaging with its messy, human consequences. Sontag pushes this concept further, describing the modern camera as a sublimation of the gun. We load it, we aim it, and we shoot. It is an automated weapon, ready to spring at the slight pressure of a finger. Through the lens, living, complex human subjects are severed from their environment. They are shrunk down, flattened, and transformed into miniaturized, manageable objects that can be collected and symbolically possessed. This creates a dynamic of inherent voyeurism. The person who intervenes cannot record, and the person who is recording cannot intervene. Photographing is essentially an act of non-intervention. There is a dark complicity required here. To record an event, even another person's intense pain or misfortune, is to implicitly encourage whatever is going on to keep happening, at least for as long as it takes to get a good picture. This predatory, acquisitive behavior is normalized constantly in everyday life. Consider the modern tourist. Most travelers feel compelled to place a camera between themselves and the environment they traveled to see. Travel becomes less about direct experience and more about executing a strategy for accumulating photograph trophies. The experience is deliberately limited to a search for the photogenic. Ultimately, the camera functions as a tool of sublimated murder. It strips subjects of their living context and their agency, freezing them into safe, static tokens that the observer can easily consume. We often treat images as undeniable proof of reality. But look at this photograph of a Depression-era breadline. A camera can only ever capture an atomic slice of space and a fraction of a second in time. It does not capture the events that led to the hunger, the political decisions that caused the depression, or what happened to these individuals an hour later. It is entirely disconnected from the continuum of history. Every photograph relies on framing, an arbitrary border chosen by the photographer. This border forcefully cuts off the surrounding context, separating the subject from everything adjacent to it. This selective framing generates what Sontag calls the image world. The image world is a view of reality that consists strictly of freestanding, unrelated particles and disconnected visual anecdotes. Photography excels at facilitating the act of looking. We see the surface of an event and believe we know it. But looking is the exact opposite of understanding. Genuine understanding starts from not accepting the world exactly as it looks. To understand a situation, you have to know how it functions in time. You need history, narrative, and an analysis of cause and effect. Because a photograph freezes time, it denies this interconnectedness. It reduces complex geopolitical or social realities into mute, static mysteries. Photographs construct a dangerous epistemological illusion. They offer an inexhaustible, fascinating surface that masquerades as knowledge while actively concealing the historical and functional truths required to actually comprehend the world. This chart plots the relationship between the proliferation of images and our moral response. The y-axis represents ethical impact, and the x-axis represents repeated exposure over time. If photographs provide undeniable evidence of injustice, why don't they reliably spur society to action? The early ethical power of photography relied heavily on sheer novelty. In the 1860s, the visual evidence of warfare had a massive impact simply because people had never seen anything like it before. Photographers like Matthew Brady brought the visceral reality of the battlefield directly to the public. Brady was an American photographer who pioneered photojournalism during the Civil War, shocking an audience unaccustomed to seeing the bloody cost of conflict. In specific instances, photographs can serve a highly targeted moral function. When images of Manzanar were published, they documented a hidden crime. Manzanar was a concentration camp where the United States government incarcerated Japanese Americans during World War II. These photographs directly challenged the pro-war consensus, with undeniable proof of government abuse. Sontag herself experienced the shock in 1945, at age 12, when she accidentally came across photographs of Bergen-Belsen and Dachau. These were Nazi concentration camps, where the systematic murder of millions of Jews and other minorities took place. A limit of horror was reached, and she felt irrevocably grieved by the visual evidence. But the ethical content of photographs is incredibly fragile. As exposure increases along the x-axis, the emotional impact steadily drops. This is the anesthesia effect. Repeated exposure to photographic atrocities initially transfixes the viewer, but it eventually deadens the conscience. The capacity to be shocked wears out. Over the decades, a vast global catalog of misery has been piped directly into our homes. Images of starving children during famines became an awful staple of evening news broadcasts and magazine covers. This relentless repetition turns the horrific into the ordinary. What was once a singular revelation of injustice becomes familiar, rendering the suffering of these individuals as something remote and seemingly inevitable. Sontag makes a provocative comparison here. The shock of photographic atrocities wears off exactly like the shock of pornography. Continual exposure neutralizes our sense of taboo, making us require more extreme images just to feel a fraction of the original outrage. Living alongside an endless, flowing stream of photographed suffering does not strengthen our conscience. It corrupts our capacity for compassion, proving that isolated images cannot sustain the moral weight of reality. When we allow the image world to replace actual history, the societal consequences are severe. Modern industrial societies have successfully turned their citizens into image junkies. We suffer from a compulsion to continuously consume visual representations of the world, treating images as the most irresistible form of mental pollution. This creates a state of aesthetic consumerism. It is an addiction where we demand that our reality be confirmed and our experiences be validated exclusively through the lens of a camera. If it wasn't photographed, it didn't happen. But a photograph has a hard political limit. An image can reinforce a moral position, but it cannot create one. Without a pre-existing political consciousness, a framework built on history and logic, a photograph of a massacre is experienced simply as a demoralizing emotional blow, not as a call to action. Over time, even images of radical revolution or extreme visceral suffering are flattened. They are absorbed into the culture as stylized commodities, consumed as art or pop culture artifacts, rather than political realities. The ultimate cynical wisdom of the photographic image is that it commands us to look only at the surface. It says, "Here is the aesthetic reality. Do not bother with the complex, invisible machinery operating beneath it." True ethical engagement requires stepping out of this image world. We have to reject the passive consumption of aestheticized tragedy. Real empathy and real change demand the rigorous, time-bound work of uncovering functional historical truth, because looking at the pain of others is not the same as understanding it.